video on demand friends can join us as they see fit later. So as I said, the first thing we're going to do today, we're going to get to the Runesmith pretty shortly. Well, yeah, I do owe you free D&D content. I'm behind on it. You can see that I've made a few small tweaks. Because I think we're going to move to an upgrade-based layout. But we'll talk about that when we get back to this design proper. The first thing I'm going to do, as I said, is I'm going to talk about the changelog for Artificer 2.0.3. This is not going to be everything. There's still stuff coming in. If this was everything, this would already be posted to Patreon, Reddit, and the world, and I'd be being told on every channel possible what I've done right and wrong. But I did want to go through this just because I think it might be an interesting thing in the context of, design discussion to talk about how the ongoing balance patches get made and what my thoughts are on why some of these are happening. So one of the big changes coming in at Artificer 2.0.3 is Arcane Retrofit. So one of the most common kind of points of contention, I guess, with the Artificer has been that it automatically scales certain weapons to +1 and +2 at the levels that the game expects you to have those weapons. That's kind of a built-in assumption in AC and resistance to non-magical damage and things that expects +1 and +2 weapons to come in at a certain point in time. But not everyone runs their game that way, and that has caused some points of contention, both from people that run their game with a faster scaling than that, and with a slower scaling than that. Right, so this isn't meant to be a nerf to the feature. This is meant to be a tweak to how the feature works. So what happens is instead of those weapons automatically scaling at 1 and 2 at 5th and 14th level, what Arcane Retrofit is a new feature that we're bringing in that does a couple things. But one of those things it does is it lets you kind of consume the bonus from any magical weapon. Just the +1 and +2 bonus. To apply that to an Artificer weapon. So this means that if your game scales faster than I assumed, you get those bonuses faster. And if it scales slower than I assumed, you get those bonuses slower. Now the other half of this actually lets you do a couple of other things, like tweak what kind of armor type magical gear is. And it might be expanded a bit more in the future. So it's not meant to be a crafting system, but it's meant to be a crafting retrofit system, which is to give the Artificer a bit more flexibility on what their options are for the gear they find. And I think that's kind of a theme that I want to play with a bit more, so we might see this feature expand a little bit in the future even. To let the Artificer not necessarily make new magical items, that'll be covered in crafting. Crafting is coming, though rather slowly. But what this does is it gives them more control of tweaking magic items to build into the core Artificer kind of theme of being a magic item expert without just giving them more magic items. So I'm going to be looking into additional ways to expand Arcane Retrofit in the future. But for now, what it's really doing is just carrying the weight of that automatic scaling to better fit in with. I'm seeing some. Is other people having Twitch issues, or is it just? I hope you guys can all hear me. Everything looks like it's working from my side, but that isn't always the full story. So that's what Arcane Retrofit is. It's mostly a tweak to how that feature is applied. And of course that has the currently named Arcane Bioengineering feature, just to allow that to carry over to the natural weapons of Fleshsmith. And if Arcane Retrofit is expanded, we'll consider what kind of properties a Fleshsmith can apply to themselves for magical weapons, because that might be an interesting way to take Fleshsmith as well. This is just a wording change. Change activate to use. Unburden now works with medium armor. This is kind of a popular request. It's just kind of a silly oversight in the original spell that you could make light, or you can make heavy armor, no longer give you stealth penalties, but you couldn't actually make like half plate, no longer give you a stealth penalty. It's just an update to wording to fix a popular kind of mistake in the wording. Gadgetsmith. So this is one thing I used to do a lot, is I would use unattack and I meant one attack. Gadgetsmith was the last remaining instance of this, because I kind of waffled back and forth on which way I preferred. But it's just going to update the wording on combat gadgets to one attack. I think that works a bit better. Beeswarm rockets. They're kind of the Gadgetsmith's big endgame kind of blast. This lets it make it so you cannot use them all in one shot. You can use them over 2 shots. But it kind of buffs their per use damage. So the original one was more balanced against Meteor Swarm in terms of damage, with the drawback of it being much smaller radius. But it was a little bit too all in. There was too much of a penalty for not using it all at once. So I want it to be better when you use it in small increments, and a little bit less all in. Magic Wand. So there was a discussion on the Discord a little bit ago about how Magic Wand works. This is a clarification, and that you cannot have multiple Magic Wands of the highest level. It's just an interaction between that upgrade and how upgrades work. So for example, at level 5, you have a Magic Wand that does 2nd level spells from your 5th level upgrade, and a Magic Wand that does 1st level spells from your 3rd level upgrade. It just kind of goes through and clarifies that with more words. A lot of changes just end up being adding more words to make what I intended with the feature to be more obvious. And then the other big change here is one that has kind of been a bit overdue. And that's that I've gone ahead and changed Infusionsmith to use extra attack at 5th level, rather than having the various different interactions of improved armament. What this means is that when you animate a weapon, you can now make 2 attacks with the same animated weapon, or you can animate 2 weapons and make 1 attack with each, or you can make 1 attack with an animated weapon and 1 attack with a carried melee weapon, or carried weapon like normal. So it just makes animated weapon interchangeable with extra attack. This gives you a lot more flexibility in some ways, but I've also put a bit of a tax on it to make it so it's not purely better than the old version, and that a single animated weapon can only attack one target per turn. So if you're using animated weapon with extra attack against a target 30 feet away, you can send your weapon over there to make 1 attack with it, and then attack it again with extra attack, but you can't attack a different target with the same animated weapon. But you can still get that feature by having 2 animated weapons and making 1 attack against the different targets with each animated weapon attack. So you'll never lose out compared to the old version. You'll just have a bit more flexibility, particularly for people that want to use their own cross-discipline upgrade on an infused weapon. So you could have like 2 animated weapons and an infused weapon, and just have magic weapons coming out of your ears, but still not be getting more attacks than you otherwise would. Potionsmith, you can no longer consume an infused potion in the same action as Adrenaline Serum. This was just one of those things I put in when I made Adrenaline Serum a bonus action because I didn't want bonus action blocking, but it turned out to be a little bit too generous. But I think you'll see that, yeah, here I've made it so you can drink an infused potion as an action. So basically you can spend 1 turn setting up both Adrenaline Serum and an infused potion, but it's a bit more costly than it used to be. You can't just spend 1 bonus action setting up everything. I just want to make sure that the kind of Adrenaline Serum build is paying something of a tax for being as good as they are. Because remember, they can easily go over the normal physical attribute cap, which is pretty powerful. So particularly combining with how they have uninterruptible haste with suddenly high physical stats, it's just a bit more of a tweaking and tuning of that particular interaction. The base range of all instant reactions has been increased to 20 feet. This actually is a fallout of the common items update I did, some of you guys might have seen, and then I discovered that the base range of a improvised thrown weapon is 20 feet. So I wanted to introduce more consistency there. Consequently, delivery mechanism still doubles it, so it went from 30 feet to 40 feet. And shape charges was dropped because it was too much overlap with delivery mechanism. And the last big change here is that reactions that only deal damage can be used as an attack as well. So this is again a thing we saw directly from the common items update, is that I want you to be able to use an attack roll against a single target or a saving throw against an AoE target. So you can either chuck it directly at their face and make an attack roll, using an improvised weapon, of course, or use it as its old standard function. Now, delivery mechanism does also give you proficiency with instant reactions as an improvised weapon, so that kind of synergy there is still there. So you can chuck them as a attack, or you can use them normally as an area effect. No, what the shape charges did was it allowed you to exclude certain targets from their area of effect with explosive reaction. And delivery mechanism does most of that already. Thundersmith is probably going to get a bit more tweaks, but these are just in context of Arcane Retrofit. Because this is the other half of Arcane Retrofit, is you'll remember that some subclasses didn't get the free +1/+2 scaling. And Arcane Retrofit now is kind of a buff to those subclasses in the sense that they no longer have to spend their upgrades on +1/+2, as they can now get that straight from Arcane Retrofit. Runesmith got some tweaks, the biggest of that the piloted golem is moving to the expanded toolbox. I like the piloted golem, but it is a controversial upgrade because not everyone treats large creatures in the same way. It is not going to really change much. People that use it previously are probably still going to use it. I just wanted to kind of clean up the behavior there in the sense that it's easier for people that want it to use it and people that don't want it to not use it. Distributed Force was swapped with Iron Muscle. This is just a kind of a balanced tweak. You can see the Iron Muscle went to 11, Distributed Force went to 9. Distributed Force additionally became all fighting styles. Two-weapon fighting is the fighting style that Artificer gets by far the most mileage from. But there's no reason not to open it up for the cost from an upgrade. It's not going to significantly change the strongest profile of Artificer, and it will just give more options. Titan Grip renamed Iron Grip and allows you to wield large weapons. It also got moved to high level. So now this is basically the capstone upgrade feature of a strength-based Runesmith. We'll get back to that when the actual update is live. And focal reflectors. So one of the common notes on Force Blast was the default range is very short. I've folded in the default range improvement of focal reflector into the base upgrade. That's essentially all this is. And then Force Accumulator is a new upgrade that we'll see shortly. Fleshsmith, Uncanny Vitality, I've mentioned for a while that's going to be somewhat nerfed in the sense that currently when you're at 0, you can spend Uncanny Vitality to get back up every turn. And I didn't like that behavior, but I've been dragging my feet on making it at the end of the turn, because I also don't like the end of the turn for any other use of it. So what I've done is kind of split the difference here. If you have 1 or more health, you can spend it at the start of your turn. And if you're at 0 health, you can still use it, but it uses at the end of your turn. So you can still pick yourself up with it almost, many, many times, but you're losing your turn to do that. It's not just like rolling a 20 and just saving throw every time. But I wanted to keep it at the start of your turn when possible, because I think that makes a lot more interesting decision making for the Fleshsmith as they're spending their hit points, right? You can plan your turn out with how many hit points you spend, because you might take different actions if you have a bigger health buffer. I'm trying to find a few more ways to reward using it to actually recover hit points, rather than using it just to become a zombie that keeps standing back up over and over. So it might even see a bit of a further buff in the hit point recovery side of things. But I think right now this is probably a pretty good balance of it's a lot more valuable at the start of your turn, but it also has, in general and healing with 5th edition entirely, that's always going to be most valuable at the end of your turn, or at this, start of your turn, when you're at 0. Perfection of Mind. It's been a bug with Perfection of Mind that there's not actually any way to use it for the most part. To restore hit points, that's going to be patched in the sense that I'm just going to give it to any time you restore hit points, just to make it a bit easier. Mutating Mastery was the one that gave you unlimited Alter Self. It's now once per short rest. Doesn't affect too much in the general how it was used. And I might even bring it up to multiple times per short rest. I think once per short rest is enough. Adorable Critter is seeing this adjustment right now. We're probably going to see a bigger adjustment on this before this patch goes live. But just giving it n times per short rest or a long rest gives your Adorable Critter a lot more impact. Uncanny Strength moved to a level 11, just an adjustment on the level placement. Unnatural Weapons is removed just because that's now part of Arcane Retrofit and Arcane Bioengineering. This is the one that's kind of delaying the upgrade, or delaying the patch for now. It's because I'm trying to clean up all of the flesh-crafted mutations, which is what we're now calling all of these. They're all going to be part of one kind of upgrade where you pick and choose what you want. Just to make it a bit cleaner, and then to better apply and better standardize the supernatural upgrades that come on top of these. So I want to let you mix and match a bit more between your flesh-crafted modular features and the upgrades you can apply to them. This might still get cut from this version because it's a bit complicated for what I want to do, but I think this will come here, and that's what I'm currently working on and testing with the Artificer update. Life Merchant just got significantly buffed. It's now once per short rest. This just makes you learn the spell. It was already once per short rest, but it didn't technically teach you the spell. Now it teaches you the spell. And then Life Void is being significantly buffed. So previously what Life Void did was on each hit, it dealt an additional 1d6 necrotic after you cast Life Transference. Now it only affects one hit, but the amount that it deals and stores is significantly increased. Just because it's already a kind of a neat niche application, because Life Void itself only triggers when you cast Life Transference, which you're not going to do a lot. So Fleshsmith still has the biggest kind of come back to this later note on it, because it's going to get a few more tweaks as the supernatural upgrades for your flesh-crafted mutations come through. Some of the things that I'm currently struggling with as far as how I want to do it is I've always really liked the tie between Forbidden Knowledge and the vampiric upgrades, but it is a little bit too expensive. So I'm still tweaking if I want to have various prerequisites on the supernatural buffs. And I think I do, but I think I want to make sure that those are actually a logical upgrade progression. So basically you'll take a knowledge for your upgrade and then a knowledge to apply that upgrade to your supernatural nature. And stuff like Vampiric might tweak a bit where you get less direct drain restored health, but then you get maybe more hit dice or something to spend on your Uncanny Vitality. So your Vampiric regeneration would be buffed. And I also want to do a few more upgrades in that nature where it better supports things like vampires and werewolves that have potent regeneration without going too far over that hill. We also might see something like I did with we saw some of this kind of being prototyped, I guess, or thought of originally in the Order of the Hunger for the Blood Hunter subclass I did a while ago. Do you think you'll allow an upgrade to remove the bonus action requirements on using reactions as attack rolls? So I'm a little probably not Archerhood. I can put some deep consideration into that, but the problem is if you are multi-classed into something that gives you extra attack, that gets out of hand really fast. So I could make it once per turn, but then you get into strange situations where you can do weapon coding plus an instant reaction with... I don't want you to be able to do weapon coding, attack, instant reaction, attack, right? Even with haste, that's just going to be too much damage per turn because you're getting that on top of your normal attack damages. Alright, so that's kind of the first part of this. I just wanted to kind of go through this upgrade just to talk about what it's going to be. Get some first reactions to see how much people hate this or that, but also talk about why I make these kind of changes and how I go about making the changes based on all the feedback I get. Because pretty much everything you see here means that someone out there had copious feedback on that feature, and I've kind of processed that feedback into making this, or it comes from something else I've made where I'm trying to introduce more consistency between the kind of disparate features of what I've worked on. So like a lot of these, as I said, came from working with common items and realizing that there should be more ways to use those that make sense. Alright, so with that, I think we're done talking through the changelog, and we'll go back into working on Runesmith. Sorry for those that came for the Runesmith design, and we're just now getting to it. I just figured it'd be a good kind of overlap, since I was going to be streaming today already, and I have that patch coming out for Artificer pretty soon, just to talk through what it's going to include and why. And if you guys have any thoughts on that, feel free to put them in chat. I am reading chat as I go. But from here, what I will be primarily chatting about is Runesmith. So last time we fleshed out... Let me see if I can move this so I can better lean on my desk here. Last time we were here with Runesmith, what we wanted to do was create a bunch of basic runes. And we've managed to do that. You can see that I've pulled them out of their table. I haven't quite reformatted them yet. And I've made them upgrades. I'm not sure on this yet, but I think this is what we're going to do. This is pretty similar to how Potionsmith works, obviously. So instead of saying, these are the tables of basic runes, I think we just throw them into upgrades and say pick 3 of them at the starting level. That gives you a degree of flexibility, but also lets you double back for ones that you really want later. And I think we have a pretty good model on how they're gonna work with our first, third, and fifth level features. So the first level feature, it gives you the basic power as well as the which just basically gives you a list of enhancements you can provide. First level characters, they're not doing a whole lot. But what it does is give you the ability to be a basically competent adventurer. Remember, that's what we're trying to do at first level. We're trying to make you not a villager. Rune of benign transposition. Wow, I had a lot of trouble saying those words. That is a really good idea, but I think I think there's a bit of a more interesting version of that that we had previously that we're probably going to pull back because it was one of the more popular features of Runesmith. Because we want our transposition to be different than just saying you do what a conjuration wizard does, but slightly, with runes, right? Whenever possible, we want to avoid being you do what someone else does, but with runes, right? We can't always avoid that, right? Because 5e has a, there's a degree of design elegance we want, in which is to say, we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. So there's two opposite conundrums there, right? We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we don't also want to just rebrand the wheel. We want to tweak the wheel in a way that we can call a new thing without trying to introduce a bunch of random new mechanics. So let's on that note, just look at the previous version, because there was a glyph of translocation. And so a glyph of translocation was you could draw it, and then you could teleport creatures to that glyph. And I think that's kind of an interesting way to have a feature like that with Runesmith. It has, serious disadvantages compared to transposition, where transposition can get you places where you can't otherwise get, which is a very helpful aspect of teleportation. But what this allows is basically a much easier to use ability to recall. So it allows people to take risks or get in through rooms and open them, and things to then get back to where they were previously. It's kind of like a save point almost, obviously with some limited range and utility. But I think we probably want to delve that idea a little bit. If you have an idea for an entire upgrade path, assuming that you mean for Runesmith, you should probably go ahead and toss it in chat. I mean, that's what we're here to discuss. If it's not for Runesmith, you can also toss it in chat, but we probably won't discuss it in much detail. I will also bring up that if you guys always feel free to put ideas in the suggestion box, I have a Google form that I do read everything that goes into that. And whenever I make an update to anything, I go through the suggestion box and I see if there's any suggestions that are relevant to what we're working on. So if you guys have upgrade tree ideas for things that aren't Runesmith, the suggestion box is probably the best place to put it. The suggestion box, I won't try to find it on stream right now because if you're on the Discord, you can go into the suggestions channel. And there's someone linked it. Excellent. I will assume that link is to the suggestion box unless people start screaming. And that should get you there. Alright. So let's start here by rewriting a little bit of what we're doing here. So you can see that we've just kind of tweaked that, we just kind of pulled this from the table. But let's start with this one, because this is kind of our basic, this is kind of our most basic place to be. And in that context, we're just going to call this Rune of Power. It just makes you stronger, just makes things better. And we're not going to worry about alphabetizing, we're just going to move this to the top right now, because it's what we're working on. And for now we're going to do creature or weapon here. And so what this tells us, I think this is what we're going to try. Giving them kind of a subtag like this of what you can target. So, targets, creature or weapon. When this rune is marked on a weapon, it gives anyone who wields that weapon proficiency with the weapon. But we got to be careful because we've just run into a trap here. I said a weapon, but we probably want to do a simple or martial weapon, because we don't want to be giving suddenly proficiency to weapons that we shouldn't be giving proficiency with. Like we don't want this to suddenly give proficiency with a thunder cannon or something. Gives anyone that wields that weapon proficiency with that weapon. When this is marked on a creature, that creature's unarmed strike damage becomes 1d4 or increases by 1 die size up to 1 die size, maximum d12. So we want to balance how this works with the creature, because we remember one of our goals is to make some sort of mystic monk-like thing that uses their tattoos or their runes as kind of runic tattoos. But we don't want to outshine what already exists. But there's a couple other unarmed strike features in this game that we want to keep in mind, right? We want this. We think this might be a good idea if this can interact with the monk. There's the pugilist out there that I think also gives you an unarmed die, a damage die, and sometimes there's natural weapons. Where we kind of think that maybe it's cool if this works with natural weapons. So a 1 die size step up isn't a big deal. It's about 1 extra damage. So it's a nice integration perk, but it's not anything that's going to do anything crazy. But I'll also point out that for now, we are letting them mark this on other creatures. How would this interact with Flame Fist? That's a good question, and we'd have to bring up Flame Fist to know the answer to that, which I don't currently have it. I guess I can pull up. Flame Fist should be in here. Fists of Fire. Yeah, so this would work with Fists of Fire. Fists of Fire gives you a D10 base. This would increase that D10 base to a D12. Oh yeah, so I don't see any reason that we wouldn't want that to work. Now I should note that Fists of Fire is probably going to be tweaked a bit in the next version. People haven't so far been thrilled with the weapon upgrade spells, which is why we haven't seen them get pulled into Artificer or other places yet, where it might make sense to have them in the future. So depending on what the final implementation of Flame Fist or Fists of Fire is, how it interacts might change a bit. But as a baseline, we kind of want that interaction, I think. We kind of want any interaction that works. And if something's already a D12, it just doesn't get any increase. We always have to... That's kind of one of the ways we keep features from being too powerful, right? If they already get a D12, then they don't get any buff from this. I assume they only get a D12 at high level. Which, at that point, maybe we can use some other rune. But we don't... Obviously, there's a couple of logistical reasons we can't go above a D12. For starters, D12 is... raises it to... No. We don't really want to... We don't really want to do combined dice types because that changes the damage curve of how that damage is applied, which is a little bit complicated. and it means sometimes the negative interaction between combined with, savage attacks or brutal criticals or all sorts of things. In general, we don't want to change the damage profile of the attack a great deal. Right, so there is still an active attack factor. So we're going to do 2 keywords for now. So one of those keywords is marked, and this is going to be the basic feature of what it always does. So marked just means drawn, but the reason we're calling this marked for now is because, as we kind of discussed, there's a handful of ways that maybe you're drawing your runes. I'm not really there to tell you how you're drawing your runes, so we're just going to use marked for the time being. And I will note that I'm not currently looking at Discord, so if anyone is talking to me on Discord, I will see that after the stream. I mentioned that because I see Discord notifications pop up. For now, though, I'm only looking at stream chat because that already exceeds my limited bandwidth. And then so we have the marked keyword for the passive benefit is, and then we're just going to call this flared for now. Flared. Is that actually a word? Flared, probably like that. So when this rune is flared, the creature the beneficiary. I can't believe that's spelled correctly. So the beneficiary, I'm going to use that word for now. We might need to go back and clean that up. What I'm trying to avoid is saying the creature wielding this weapon or the creature this is marked on every time. We'll see if I can get away with a term that combines those two, target sayings, just because I don't want to type out that string each time we refer to the person who's getting a benefit from it, which is beneficiary. Gains advantage on their next attack roll made before the start of your next turn. Before the start of your next turn. But I think we also need to... Right, the target of this rune works, but the problem with that is that you could argue the target is the weapon, and the weapon can't get advantage. Yeah, the recipient of this rune's benefits is best second to the long way of saying beneficiary. That is probably more correct, but I'm not sure if it needs all those extra words. It's something that we'll have to consider based on how many people yelled at me for it. Usually the way I make things is I use the least words possible, and then I start adding more words as people keep telling me all the ways that trying to use less words is making it broken. Right, most of the corrections people make for my stuff, what they're asking for is they want more words. But on the other hand, there's going to be a legion of people that complain about everything being 10 pages or 20 pages or whatever. So I try to use as least words as possible let's see what I can get away with first. But I think advantage isn't quite enough on this. So we need to think of what would be something else we can give them besides advantage. And we might have to put a pin in this and come back to it. Maybe just increase the damage by 1d4. The next attack roll is made with 2 times strength or dex. That's a pretty big bonus. That's not a bad idea, though. Let's pencil that in. Let's go with that for now. We might have to come back and say that that's too much, particularly if we start figuring out how if there's some way for a warsmith to get this, because a warsmith would get this, slap this on their power fist, and suddenly just +2. That's more balanced, but more floating. I think I'd rather have 1d4 than just +2. 1d4 is slightly stronger. Oh, +1, +1. So that's something we'd want to avoid. because that would be a floating modifier. So what a floating modifier is any time you're giving a temporary number tweak that affects what's on your character sheet, right? As much as possible, we don't want to modify the character sheet a great deal in the middle of combat. So, I mean, a lot of you are going to think that you're very smart people and you can handle whether or not attack has a +1 to hit. But things like that tend to bog down the game, particularly for just in ways that are kind of we don't have to avoid it at all cost, but in general we want to avoid it at some cost. So even when that is the best design in terms of kind of math and kind of theme of what we want, of just being slightly more powerful in that attack, we probably don't want to make the flared effect a floating modifier. Floating modifiers to damage is less dangerous than to hit, because you don't have to necessarily calculate your damage in the same way, in the sense that your damage changes from every round anyway, where you don't really want your plus hit to change. I mean, it is new players, but it's also just players that don't have an innate grasp of what their plus hit modifier is every turn. And I think most groups have. And it's not even just the inability to handle it, it's the concern about play speed, right? We don't want to make anything that has pretty much any impact on play speed if we can avoid it. That's why we want to do things like throw extra dice into the pile, because that's just you add an extra die and you're rolling. Maybe it takes a bit longer to add, but it doesn't change how your attack profile works. You can still get as much information as possible from your character sheet, and the thing that your new power is doing is as discrete as possible. So let's go back to the 1d4 then for now. So gains advantage on their next attack roll. Maybe we'll start and adds 1d4 to their next damage roll. And if that attack hits, deals 1d4 additional damage. So should the 1d4 scale? That's something we're going to have to tackle, but I don't think so. Because, and there's a reason for this, remember that flaring your runes scales with extra attack. And if we go back to this feature up here, right, you can either, when you get to level 5, you can either attack twice or flare your rune twice. So for example, you could attack once, flare the rune once, so you're already getting extra attack scaling. We don't want to give you inherent cantrip scaling on top of your extra attack scaling, because then you'd be scaling twice. And then flaring your rune would always be better than making a weapon attack, right? Attacks don't scale, so we can't have something that interacts with extra attack scale the way a cantrip would. Well, it's not so much missed as we haven't really put in that feature yet. I mean, we just talked about it briefly, but there's still a lot of question marks there, which indicates we're not quite done with that feature. But we think that's how we want the feature to work. Now, maybe we don't want the feature to work that way, but I think that that's probably the most elegant interaction between runes and attacks for a class we want to be competent doing both. Because either we have to make them interact, or we have to make them fully parallel, and that sounds like a lot of extra work. One second. Sorry, just making sure that everything is actually recording correctly. But we also now know that this is conflicting with our elemental power. So I don't like this deals 1d4 extra damage. We're going to just write and does something cool. So I'll use this for now. Did not work. Will Rune of Power not work for cantrip attacks or spells? It would work for Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. There shouldn't be any reason it wouldn't work for those. It's a buff because one attack matters more there, but not a significant one. I mean, it's less of a buff than if you consider like making it work on a Thundersmith or a Rogue or something that cares about their hit more than a fighter. It's also something we have to keep an eye on of how it interacts with Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter, because anytime you're saying you are better at hitting, what you're saying is you're better at dealing plus 10 damage. It's not necessarily a problem, right? If you're spending an attack to be better at making an attack, not a big problem. But the way that might become a problem is since we are currently allowing you to do this on someone else, we have to be careful of the Voltroning effect, of where all buffs get stacked on one person and they become a super adventurer. So we will put right now, does something cool, and if we think of something cool besides advantage, so there's a couple permutations of how we can treat this. Either it can be advantage plus something else, or we might come up with one big flared effect that is better than advantage we can apply. What we know right now is that advantage is a cool enough thing to give, but we want to give something maybe more than advantage because you can already get advantage on an attack with the help action, right? So this would technically be ranged, and that's actually something we need to talk about, is what is the flare range. Rolling damage with advantage is an idea I've played with before, but it's a little bit complicated. Just because that can be more dice, and it's on a system people use, is an idea. Maximizing a certain number of dice is also an idea. But maximizing dice, while it's one of my favorite mechanics, also takes away from rolling dice, which is a big problem. Because what we want to avoid is taking away things that players enjoy, and players' favorite thing in the game is to roll dice. I mean, that's why usually at least, 30 to 50% of players at the table is to roll dice. So we want to, generally as much as possible, make more dice rolling fun. But you might think, well, rolling with damage with advantage is exactly that, and that's true, which might mean it's a good idea. But it's also sounds a lot like something that's going to slow down turn speed. So it's a thought. It also has potential some overlap with Great Weapon Master, where Great Weapon Fighting, where Great Weapon Fighting already does something similar to that. Letting you reroll 1s and 2s would be a cool feature, besides that for some people that wouldn't actually do anything because they already do that. And now that's where we get into reinventing the wheel versus rebranding the wheel versus feature overlap. There's probably a good idea in there, right? But we need to think if we can make an expression of that good idea that is simple, doesn't reduce play speed, and is still a good idea. It's always easy to make a good idea that is either complicated or adds more steps to the process. We have to make sure if we can make that good idea something that fits into the rest of the table play. And I'm not sure that's not it, right? I mean, a damage with advantage isn't a mechanic we might want to consider. I wouldn't say that's a bad idea. It's just not one that I would jump on immediately, just because it sounds a lot like that's going to slow down things. I assure you that most good ideas don't work. That's why these things take a while. If the first good idea I had just slotted into every feature, designing a new class would take me like 25 minutes. I can generate a bunch of ideas. Most of them are not going to be keepers, though. I mean, we're currently on our, third day of this, third stream of this design, and we've made it to the first upgrade. You know, this will take a while, and our first upgrade currently ends with a question mark. No one said this is going to be fast. I don't think I promised that. So, Rune of Elemental Power. Targets a creature. Probably don't need creature weapon to be capitalized. Probably need to put a creature and a weapon just to be all fancy grammar. Yeah, I don't need A for now. That's a lot of extra characters. Someone will yell at me later that it needs to be a creature or a weapon. When this rune is marked on a symbol or martial weapon, when this rune is marked on a target, that creature or weapon deals damage that creature or weapon deals is converted into cold, fire, lightning, or lightning. When this rune is flared, the damage of the next attack the next damage roll, right? We do want to stick this as damage roll, I think. Because I think we want to give this rune multiple chances to hit if you miss with extra attack. So yeah, we'll keep the next damage roll part. So that's something to keep in mind when you're writing a feature, right? The difference between next attack, next damage roll, etc. What about absorb elements for the runic flare? I think that's too situational. Absorb elements is a great spell. We like absorb elements, and it would work well for the theme of the rune. But you just don't take elemental damage that often. And it's probably too strong to give a first level spell effect as a flare effect. Because remember, there's no actual cost for these flare effects besides your action. So I think, I think it's something to keep in mind, but I think it's too strong and too situational. And that's actually a design lesson for us all here, is that one of the most common issues that faces, design is that we can't much balance a feature to be stronger just because it's more situationally niche. That's a common idea, is that if you can only do something once out of every 10 situations, you can make it 10 times stronger. But that's not really how it works, because you're not giving up enough to have that power. Everything needs to be balanced against the action economy first and foremost. Right. So exactly that. We have, as a bonus action, you can flare it X times per short or long rest, but as an action, you can always just flare your rune. And that's to give us, remember, because if we go back to our model, right, we have 3 characters we want to make sure we can make with this. For the Runic Knight and Runic Mystic, they're primarily using these as bonus actions with their limited power. Because we want them to be attacking mostly. Hey Sengem, welcome to the stream. Yep, the goal is to provide something mildly unique. This is my replacement to Happy Fun Hour, such as I can replace such a glorious thing. But what we want to do here is make sure that we can still cover all 3 of these characters. And remember, that does make things a lot more complicated, but we keep that in mind as we go. If we make it just the bonus action, we'd have to give the runic caster something else to do with their action, which we could do easily in the form of a cantrip, right? But we don't really want them to be a cantrip caster, just because that's a less interesting version of what exists than what could exist. We certainly can make a elemental cantrip, basically just a cantrip of casting Firebolt. Well, yeah, I understand. I'm just making sure that we kind of keep in mind our design goals as we go, because that's where we always want to circle back to why are we doing this, because sometimes we do want to discard previous parts of the design goal, just because if that's not as important as the benefit we'd get from the conversion, we don't want to find ourselves locked in to what we're doing. We want to make sure that we're always still doing the best version of what our vision is. And even that means our vision might change if we have a better vision, but we don't want to forget that we have a vision to start with that we're working towards. So yeah, when this is flared, we add damage. The next damage roll deals an additional 1d10 damage of the element. And I do have a great deal of sympathy for the idea that you add damage is not the most interesting design, right? So there's possibly something here that is more interesting than that. But we also have to keep in mind is we're dealing with a first level feature. In the first level of this game, what people do is they run up and they hit something with a sword. So we don't want to do something that is much more exciting than that, because that's what we're competing with, right? The first level features are, cantrips, fighting styles, things that do minor amounts of straightforward damage. That's not to say we can't have more interesting things, so there's cantrips that don't do damage, but at the core of our class, we need way to apply more damage to Goblin. That's pretty much the heart of first level features. Will this make a Goblin die faster? So I saw an interesting question earlier of if this damage type should be set at marking the rune or on the attack. And I definitely think it should be marking the rune. I like flexibility. I like to give flexibility to the players as much as possible. But remember what we are is we're a runesmith. And a runesmith is all about preparation for the situation. It just makes a lot more sense that a rune would be a rune of fire, or a rune of cold, or a rune of lightning, than a rune of whatever element is most convenient at the time. When you're fighting a red dragon, you probably want to not draw a rune of fire. You probably want to draw a rune of, cold or lightning. And that's where we get back to, remember, one of our early design goals is that we want preparation to be part of what we're rewarding. See, talking is hard. The runesmith for. We want them to feel clever when they've deduced that they're fighting a red dragon and therefore should use a cold rune, right? These things are not super complicated, but we want these kind of almost mini games of making sure that you've done the best job you can for the situation that you're up against. And you said that's the ultimate trouble with absorb elements, is that if you give them absorb elements, they want to absorb fire against a fire dragon and definitely not deal fire against a fire dragon. So maybe we'll give them a cooler version of absorb elements somewhere down the line that, works better than that. I don't know if that's something we want to do, but that's something that we can consider, is that absorb elements has that as a core design flaw. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because absorb elements is a first level spell. Absorb elements should have a weakness. But if we want to make something cooler, we can make absorb elements without that weakness. So yeah, I'm seeing elemental opposites. So let's put that in. Remember, we have a bin up here for potential upgrades. So let's call that Rune of Elemental Conversion. We might fiddle with that name more. Absorb elements, but deal damage of different type. Because I think a Rune of Elemental, Conversion makes a lot of sense. And Absorb Elements is one of those things where it would make sense that marking that on armor or a creature would give them the ability to absorb elements. That seems like something that a rune could do. That seems pretty reasonable. But just giving them the first level spell, well, now we can give them the first level spell plus something a little extra. So how long we want to let them store it? We could increase the duration they store it from. I think we probably won't. We definitely keep that in mind. But we want to be careful with that because, you know, we'd have to put a lot of water white picket fences around that. Because if we let them, we don't want to let them charge up a super weapon here. If we say you can, you know, store 1d6 damage each time you take damage, you know, someone's going to be standing on a campfire with a Rune of Fire Absorption. So the next time they hit something, they deal, you know, 40d6 lightning damage. You can put guardrails in to prevent that kind of thing. But we want, you know, as much as possible, we want to use the existing guardrails for behavior like that. So, yes, create bonfire synergy. You know, players will always find the most, the most cheese-induced version of anything you create. So you always have to look at the maximum cheese version of what your power is. How can this be used by a munchkin? That's the core question you ask yourself every time you write a new feature. If someone is going to be clever and stare at this for a while, combine this with multi-classing and feats and God knows what, how will they one-shot the boss with it? And so you need to make sure, the easiest way to prevent that, I guess, to summarize, is don't do things that other things don't already do. So here, there's not really any way to cheese elemental conversion. It's just better. Whereas if we let them store it, then you bring in cheese. And you could obviously fence the cheese in the way that you can only store X number of charges, but is that worth the added complexity? I'm not sure. Because if the cool thing they want to do is being blocked by the fencing, there was no point in allowing that in the first place. No, you cannot eat the cheese. That's firmly against our design goals. Alright, so I think we can keep going on these. One thing we want to start thinking about while we're working on this is, remember, we don't quite have this finished. So, sorry, excuse me. What we're going to do for starters is we're going to split these features. We want this to be basically part of your extra attack power budget. But extra attack is a template feature. We don't want to add words to it unless we have to. So, combat runes, that's a dumb name. We're going to come back to it. The reason that's called combat runes right now is because this is mimicking combat gadgets. Additionally, at 5th level. So whenever you write a love feature, right, the first feature, you have a choice. You can do at 5th level, beginning at 5th level, or starting at 3rd level. As you can see, we've done a couple of different iterations. And I honestly have no idea if there's any method or madness to how Wizards of the Coast does it. I think they just draw the wording out of a hat, whether they're going to do starting at X level, at X level, or beginning at X level. Best I can tell, those are all interchangeable. But if we have a second feature, we always want to do additionally at X level, just to make sure that we're clarifying you're getting multiple things. And the other thing to keep in mind here is there are versions of this Artificer, right, that only get extra attack at 5th level. Extra attack is our entire power budget. So however we do this, we don't want this feature plus extra attack to be stronger than extra attack. Now it will be slightly because this is flexibility and flexibility is power, but we want to be wary of the fact that we don't want this to stack with extra attack. So additionally at 5th level, let's see, what is our feature? What we're doing here is we want to replace an attack with a runic flare. So when you make an attack as part of the attack action, you can instead use your runic flare. Alright, if a rune affects one attack, make it scale. If it affects multiple attacks, make it not scale. Right, but the concern that we have with scaling is that you can now flare twice on your turn and technically 3 times if you use your bonus action limited. So, but that's one thing we want to kind of consider now. Can you flare the same rune multiple times with this ability? And I think there's no reason to stop that in cases where it would work. But we have to think about it. I would say no. I think you should give more reasoning there. I think that no is definitely a valid option, but we need to think about what the pros and cons of this are. Because if we don't allow that, we have to make sure that they have enough to do with both of their flares if they want to do multiple flares. But some of the runes obviously naturally don't scale, right? So we have to be a bit careful about allowing that. Because, for example, Rune of Power, advantage doesn't stack, right? You can't get advantage twice. So the only way to make that stack, make it apply to multiple attacks consecutively, like an action queue, but that's a bit more complicated. So if a player were to flare 3 times, but I think we can balance that. Well, let's think about it. So flaring 3 times would be, in our most basic case, would be 3d10 damage. 3d10 damage is perfectly within line. And in fact, that's actually too low if we think about it, right? 3d10 damage compared to 2 attacks is going to be a bit too low. Well, actually, okay, I am forgetting part of this design here. Because this is not compared to... this does not compare directly to a cantrip because it has multiple chances to apply. Because there's the next damage roll. So that's a question. I think we're going to table that question. We just need to think that we need to figure out if runes stack. There's a compelling argument for yes and a compelling argument for no. But for now, we're going to just not answer that question. But we are going to keep that ticking in the back of our minds as we go. And if we come up with a compelling argument one way or another, we can try to think to it. So, but then there's a big question of, we have a 14th level feature unfilled out here. Now, these features often go unfilled out until the end of a design because these can be upgrades the 14th level feature competes with the upgrades a great deal. But what we want the 14th level feature to be is, even after the divergence of all the different characters, if we can think of an upgrade that we're like, wow, that is universally good to every character, that's what we can kind of slot into our 14th level ability. Sometimes, like Runesmith, we just give up and we just give them an extra upgrade. But a lot of times what we want this to be is, what is an upgrade that going into tier 4, which 14th level is right before tier 4, what is an upgrade that we want everyone to have? This is our chance to give everyone the same upgrade that we think is necessary, right? Because normally we don't want to write an upgrade that everyone has to take. But if we have a high level upgrade that we think everyone would want to take, this is where we can put it. So basically, should the 14th level dictate the upgrades, or the upgrades dictate the 14th level? Typically speaking, I write the upgrades before I write the 14th level feature. And then when I'm writing the upgrades, if one of those upgrades seems like a great idea, that's when I convert it to a 14th level feature. Sometimes I have the 14th level feature in mind. This time I definitely don't. Unlimited use of the bonus action, that's probably too strong. Maybe some recharge mechanic, but I'm not usually that fond of recharge mechanics. We do see that the 14th level feature of the Fleshsmith is a recharge mechanic, where you get X extra uses on short rest, but Ruining Flare already currently recharges on short rest. So converting long rest to short rest at 14th level, that's something we can do. But we don't currently need that in this case because we already have it recharging on short rest. So we will, right now, haven't seen any ideas on this, and I don't have any right now either. So we'll circle back to this as something to keep in mind as we're writing upgrades. If we write an upgrade that we think, wow, everyone needs that, we'll come back and put it in that here. Or if we come up with something that we figure out that the class is missing for high-level content, we can try to add that high-level content here. Just if we find out that we need something to keep us competitive, right? If we're too far behind, then we put it in here. We'll go for about 15 more minutes. We're already gone over an hour. We'll hit for about an hour and a half. We don't want to go too long because obviously we'll exhaust you poor folks, and I'll be out of my talking. But let's start looking at our upgrades. These are all pretty low-level upgrades for so far. Dire Avenger, marking your rune as an action. That's not a bad idea. Gives you more flexibility. That's something we could keep in mind. Let's grab our newest, freshest idea. Rune of Elemental Conversion. So we are currently under unrestricted upgrades. So let's start fleshing out our brackets here. All right, we have unrestricted upgrades. Then we don't have another bracket until 5th level upgrades. Which if we look over here, how does this work? So unrestricted, 5th level. And then I think we have 9th level. And then we have 11th level. And then we have 15th level. So I will talk to these for a second. So it is always awkward that we have 9th and 11th as two different brackets. There is a potential world in which I remove the 9th level bracket, because that's a little too close to... the 9th and 11th level brackets are a little too close, but there is a good reason to have them like that. 11th level is where our main power spike occurs. So anytime we want to increase the damage, right, we have to... The only real place we can do a significant damage increase is at 11th level. 9th level, though, is still important because that's when a half-caster gets 3rd level spells. We don't want to give 3rd level spells at 5th or 7th level. Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. I have not yet seen the book. I have seen some of the stuff in the book just from the internet talking about it, but I do not currently have the book in my hand. So I can't talk in any great depth about it. When I get it, we'll talk about if Artificer will include anything from it or not. It's a little bit tricky to include sources like that. Just it kind of depends on how much part of the universal, I guess, zeitgeist or whatever of 5e it becomes. Because I use spells from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, obviously, because I just assume people have that. But I don't know if this is something I'll be able to assume people have or not, and I don't want to give spells that I'm basically saying to go look up on the internet. So it's something I'll consider, but before I have to get it in my hands before I can give a more intelligent comment. So where were we? Okay, so 9th level spells, or 9th level, that mostly, be nice to see an unrestricted upgrade that makes unarmed fighting viable. So we actually have that, right? We have up here in Rune of Power, we give you a D4 weapon die. One thing we want to consider here, actually, and this is just occurring to me, is that there is the Unearthed Arcana fighting style for unarmed fighting. I don't know if that's on D&D Beyond here. Unarmed fighting? Unarmed fighting style. Let's see if we can find it here. Because it's only in Unearthed Arcana. Yeah, I don't see this here, so let's put a pin on it. Okay, that looks like a safe link to click on. Yeah, I'm being a little careful about what sources I open on stream for obvious reasons. I'm trying to use D&D Beyond primarily for that. What you use is up to you. I'm not going to tell you what you should or should not use. But I figure that here we just keep things by the book and above board. So unarmed fighting. This might be something that we want to give. I generally like this implementation of unarmed fighting. It's a little bit, it causes some raised eyebrows because it makes you better at punching things than a monk at low levels. But the problem is if you consider what you're actually doing, right? A simple weapon is already 1d6. It's not going to be really viable to be much worse than a simple weapon. So I think it puts us in an awkward spot, right? We don't want to be stronger than the monk, but we also don't want to be something that people can't really use. How monks deal with this, obviously, is at low levels. A monk tends to use a quarterstaff until their unarmed die catches up to their monk weapon. Right. Well, we won't do more damage per round than a monk, but we will be directly better at punching things in the sense that we do more damage per punch than a monk. But I think that's fine, because as we just talked about, I don't know that it's viable if we don't. I'm not sure if we want to use unarmed fighting or not, because it's in Unearthed Arcana, and not everyone uses that. But for the time being, let's pencil this in. So that creature gains. So we'll put this in a note right now. And note blocks are your friend. Unfortunately, things don't copy paste well from that. So in a more final version, we probably don't want to copy paste on Unearthed Arcana. But let's just tuck this here for now, so that we know what we're dealing with. We could just grant a feature very similar to this down the road. So that's a good question. Do we want to make your weapon finesse? Because currently this only works with strength, both the way we've designed it and the way unarmed fighting works. For now, let's keep it with strength. We'll leave dex punching to monks, but it's something to keep in mind. So let's keep... You gain the unarmed fighting. I really dislike it when they put fighting as the last word of a fighting style, because it means that every time you type it, you have to write unarmed fighting style with the same problem with great weapon fighting, where it's great weapon fighting style and two weapon fighting style. But that's just what we deal with here. So I'm seeing some issues with this, because now we conflict with increases the weapon die to one size, and we don't easily stack with this. If you strike with two free hands. So the question is, do we still want to have our increased damage size if you already get this from somewhere else? That's the question here. We'll have to think about that. For now, we're keeping that in. You gain. Okay, so we need to change this to the creature gains an fighting style. Well, that rune is marked on them, or make it a separate feature. What do people think about making a separate feature? So that would mean you have a cost of 2 features for a relatively powerful ability. Let's think. So, because that on its own... So maybe if this is a common... So stacking runes, that's going to be a big question. If you can make 2 runes of power on something or not. I think we probably don't want to stack runes in most cases. Now we might make an exception for this if we have a particularly good idea that is only supported by rune stacking of the same rune. But I think in general we don't want to stack the same rune multiple times. Because that gets into what the problem with the last version of Runesmith was. Remember, we've done this once before, and that's what we did last time, and it was a mess. So I think we don't do stacking the same rune, but I think for now we are going to pencil in making it a separate rune that does stack with this one. Exactly. I know there's two versions of this, right? There's the version where we give the same benefit. We stack the same rune as the version we stack two different runes. Right. Raw, you cannot have two features of the same name. You can always defeat raw by saying you can do it. Specific always beats generic. The question is if we want to do that, and I think we've concluded that we don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is Rune of Unarmed Fighting. Now hopefully we can name this something better over time. Targets a creature. And goddammit, I've just convinced myself I need to put A in front of this every time because saying targets creature, we'll go with that. Targets creature. It does sound a little weird though, so I'm expecting that we probably have to change how that's worded. And then we'll just, for now, use the wording here. Just to be clean here, we're going to just do grants unarmed fighting style. Should we experiment with a single specific stacking rune? Well, we'll see. I don't think we want to introduce stacking runes unless we have a good idea for why it's a good idea. We don't want to make something work just because that we could. We can do anything. But we want to make sure that we have a compelling reason to go down that path before we go. So if someone comes with an idea that only works with stacking runes, that is an exceptional addition, well then we add stacking runes. But until then we need to figure out why would we want to do that, because that's added complexity without currently having a merit. So here's the next question. This currently has no flared effect. So we have two options. We can either give it its own flared effect, or we can call this something besides a rune. We might want to reintroduce the terminology of rune versus glyph, or we might want to keep this as a rune and think of, do we need a flared effect for it? Because at some point we also want to have things that aren't runes. And I think this is where we want to start having something that's not a rune. But maybe we call it rune still. Whilst the rune is active on the creature. Yes. While the rune is active on the creature. So we probably don't want to give the bonus action because that's part of Rune of Speed, which we're going to have down here. We've already gotten that idea somewhere else. You might want to clarify how many runes you can draw during a long rest. One read each. Right, so let's go up and clarify that feature. So you gain 3 runes. So let's write here and talk about this feature. Starting at first level, you gain the ability to draw and powerful. Select 3 upgrades that grant a new rune. So now is where we start putting in the limiting language of So 3 is how many upgrades you get, not how many you can draw. We're about to come up with how many you can draw. But I don't think 3 is necessarily too much. Because remember, this is the only thing you're doing at first level. Let's start with the assumption that you draw all 3 runes. Let's start with the assumption you have 3 runes, and you draw them all in yourself. That's giving you the ability to use armor and a weapon and something else. That might be too much with the flared effects, but remember you can't really flare them as a bonus action right now. So you'd be basically giving yourself martial weapon proficiency, armor proficiency, and the ability to do fire damage or something. I don't think that's probably too much at first level. Remember, this is what you're getting. This is going to be all the combat power you're getting at first level. If we remember, what does an artificer actually get at first level besides this? The answer is cool stuff, but not any combat power. So remember, the only other thing you're getting at first level is the ability to cast Detect Magic and Identify as rituals. So this is pretty much your entire first level feature. As always, we kind of want to compare this to what is a caster getting, what is a fighter getting, what is a, half caster getting. Now, half casters kind of get screwed at first level, so that's something to keep in mind, is that if we screw ourselves, it's sort of tradition, because a paladin at first level is terrible. But of course, first level in general is terrible. So let's say, so here's the question. Can you draw multiple instances of the same rune? So for example, could you draw 3 rune, if you take Rune of Power, can you draw a Rune of Power on everyone's weapon? I think my inclination is no. Thought on Runic Flare. Do we want to tie what the flare is into the Runic Flare ability, or specify per rune, thus allowing some to be... So basically, what kind of action it takes to flare the rune? I think we avoided that. I see why we'd want to do that, right? You want it to be a reaction. But I think in the default ability, we don't want to do that because A, that costs us a lot of extra language, because every rune we have to specify what action it is to flare, and B, we probably don't want too many runes to work that way. Let's think about it, because there's an alternative to that. There's an alternative to that in that on a rune or on an upgrade, we can say that you can consume a use of your runic flare to do something else. I think what we do is, if we want to do that down the road, we attack that from the opposite direction. We say, as a reaction, you can expend a use of runic flare to do this as a reaction. Because specific beats general, so we can have the general rule that is simpler, and then have a specific rule that complicates it if we need to. Draw same rune. Number of times equals half your proficiency at max. That's not a bad idea. I like the idea that the clamp that we're putting on this eases up as the levels go up. Yeah, let's pencil it in. So you can draw up to... So here's that's half of the scaling. We have to have the other half of the scaling of how many runes can you draw total. So you can draw up to X runes total. So we know we want that to be probably 3 right now, but how many runes we want that to be as you scale, because we probably want to scale how many runes you can draw. And draw up to your... half your proficiency mod. think proficiency is bonus. I think I always type proficiency modifier, but I think it's supposed to be proficiency bonus. Have your proficiency bonus of the same rune. There's a better way to word that. So int mod plus proficiency is probably way too high. At level 1, that would give you, let's see, 5 runes. Probably a good bit too high. We also probably don't want to do just int mod, because that screws over anyone not focusing on int. We've currently gone mad. We've currently made the subclass mad, and that you want dex or strength if you're being attack based. So we probably don't want to kick their shins on the int mod right now. Let's try proficiency bonus +1 for now. We don't want to do proficiency bonus +1 because that makes multi-classing too good. So let's say 3, and then you can draw an additional rune at 5th, 11th, and 17th level or something. We'll come back and adjust this more. No, we're not going to give them charisma mod runes, but I think we don't have to tie this to a stat mod. That's our easy out. Is that plenty of things work with no mod, and there's no reason to force them to use a mod here. Maybe a banded table, set levels 1 to 5. Yeah, at this point we might have made this so complicated that it's better to just give them a table. I think you're probably right there. We have come up with an abomination. I'll consider that. If we keep this, I'll probably convert it to a table. I'm not 100% sure we have the nailed down version yet. So let's keep it as this for now, but let's keep in mind that if we're going to make some sort of abomination with it, we might want to convert it to a table. Proficiency bonus. Technically, you don't have to say rounded down because everything is rounded down unless you say elsewise, but it's generally better to just put in the rounded down. Because otherwise people are going to ask you about that, and you're going to spend your time answering that question. So we've gone over what I said I was going to go. We're currently at 40 minutes past instead of 30 minutes past. So we are going to wrap up here. Thank you all for coming, and we will pick up on this on Friday. I think we're only going to chug along on this probably 1 or 2 more streams. And then I'll put up a vote for what we work on next. We might not go all the way through this. We'll see how far we get in the next probably 2 streams. I think we've made some pretty good progress here. And then we'll pick up on something else. I'm going to keep doing this twice a week for the time being, as long as you fine folks keep showing up. So we'll figure out what to do next. I think we are going to keep on the Runesmith for at least 1 or 2 more streams until we have a very solid framework that we can start handing out for playtesting. I want to get us at least probably to the playtesting version of this subclass before I move on. But I'm just kind of bringing up the future possibilities. A vote for what to do next will probably be on Patreon at some point. We'll probably do it through that. But if you have ideas for what you want to see next, just because we probably want to leave that poll running for about a week, I want to throw that poll up in not too long, even if we don't get to it for a week or 2. Would you do a stream playtest? I don't know. I don't really have the tech to play D&D online very well so far. With the current going on of the world, I've been switching my own games to online, but it's not a smooth and seamless experience so far. So maybe someday I will have the tech to do playtests online, something like that. with you fine folks or something like that. But I don't think we're there yet. But when I want to make sure that the kind of playtest version is something that I can give out to everyone here. You guys could take it home and give your thoughts, chew on it a bit more. But I think we're still about, 2 streams from that. So I think let's plan on 2 more streams of the Runesmith. That'll give us about the 1 week I was talking about for the poll. So I'll try to put that poll up by Friday. So before Friday, if you guys have an idea of what I should work on next, well, you know what to do. Send me that idea. Alright, so I'm going to hit stop recording and stop streaming. Of course, as always, you can find me on Reddit, Discord, Patreon, whatever. And again here on Friday. So talk to you all later. And thanks for showing up. Sorry you just got here for the very end. We've already gone about 40 minutes over the planned time, so unfortunately, that's going to be it. But hopefully you can catch the next one on Friday, because we'll be at the same place. And of course, for those that did miss it, this will be uploaded as a video on demand or VOD on my YouTube channel. There's nothing else on my YouTube channel besides these video on demands. So you can always check it out there. Unfortunately, it does not have the wonderful chat interaction. Or at least it only has the recorded version of mine. Alright, talk to you all later. Thanks for tuning in.